All right. Okay, so today, introduction to Emmanuel Levinas. So, just so you know, in advance, Emmanuel Levinas, in my view, is the hardest philosopher in the whole history of philosophy. Very difficult. Don't worry though, I'll be there. I'll hold your hand. You only need to know what I tell you. But you will realize when you start reading him, right? If you thought Marcel was bad, Levinas is worse. So don't worry, only lasts for Levinas. Afterwards, the last text we have to do, Simone Weil, is going to be very easy. So this is it. Hang in there. Okay, so let me introduce him a little bit. I'm going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to talk about post-Holocaust philosophy. Second, I'm going to talk about Levinas's bio, so you have an idea who he is. And third, we'll talk about the text we have to read, Enigma and Phenomenon. Okay. So number one, post-Holocaust. Okay, so we are now right after the Holocaust, right? In fact, we'll see when we go into Levinas's biography that his whole family dies in the Holocaust, extended family, right? So he is emerging from this trauma and he's going to be philosophizing from this experience, right? So this is, he's going to be really reflecting in his own flesh and blood, right? About God, the existence of God. What does it mean to be a believer after the Holocaust? What does it mean to believe in God? What does God mean, right? I mean, before the Holocaust, we had a very clear definition of God, right? God was good, he was omnipotent, right? He was all good, all knowing, all powerful, right? These were the three concepts. Let me write them down, right? All good, all knowing, all powerful, right? This is how we used to see God before the Holocaust, right? The Holocaust arrives, and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, right, the Holocaust is the genocide of the 6 million Jews and others, right, during World War II, which took place in Germany under the Nazi rule. So after this trauma, right, many people who had some kind of religious background, whether they're Christian or Jewish, start to question, right, like, where was God, right? This is the main post-Holocaust question. Where was God? And if he was anywhere, who is he? We don't recognize him, right? We are used to seeing God as someone who loves us, who protects us, who saves us. And yet during this event, it's like God didn't exist, right? There's nothing. The heavens didn't shake, right? Nothing. There was no intervention. It just happened, right? Under God's watch, in a way. So people now are struggling, right, with who God is, the concept of God. And they're realizing that, well, you can't have both all loving and all powerful anymore, right? Let's see, let's talk about just those two concepts, right? All good versus all knowing, right? You can't have both of these in the same being anymore. So because either God is all loving, but he didn't act well, probably then because he was not all powerful, or he's all powerful, he could have acted, but he was not all loving, and that's why this happened. So you see how the concept of God disintegrates. You can't have both all loving and all powerful in the same concept, right? Either God was all loving and yet he didn't intervene. Why? Well, probably because he's not all powerful, or he has chosen not to be all powerful, or he is all powerful, but then clearly he's not all loving. Are you all following how the concept of God disintegrates? Put your hand in the screen if you're seeing, right? We used to think of God as both all loving and all powerful. Now we cannot even think the two together anymore. It dissolves, right? So we're in a very bad situation after the Holocaust, at least philosophically and theologically speaking, right? The question that is on everybody's lips is, where was God? And if he was anywhere, who is he really? We don't recognize him. We don't recognize this silence, or like some philosophers put it, you know, we are in the context of the eclipse of God, right? If you know what an eclipse is, this is when the moon covers the sun, or something like that. Not sure how it works anymore. But anyways, the light is covered, right, of the sun by the moon passing between the sun and the earth, right? So it's as though God's light was covered, like an eclipse during this time, right? So Levinas is really going to address this question of where was God. And what's going to be interesting is the way he responds, right? And what we need to be prepared for in this class, and I'm already setting the ground for this, right, is that if God was anywhere, we cannot think of him like we are used to. What Levinas is going to do is radically change our perspective on God. He's going to redefine who God is, right? And because for him, only when God is redefined in this way can we understand his presence, or can we understand what happened, right? So we should be prepared. So make sure you jot this down for yourself. We are going to move into a redefinition of what God means, who God is. Levinas is going to shift our perspective, right? And we're going to see that it's a very shocking shift he's going to do, right? We are used to thinking of God as somewhere in the heavens, powerful, ruling the world. Levinas is going to deconstruct this image that we have and give us something completely different and unexpected and even shocking, right? We're going to see how he sees God in order to reconcile God with such an event as the Holocaust. Okay, so let's go a little bit into his biography. So you know a little bit about him. So he was born in 1906 and he died in, I always forget, I think it was 1996. Someone verify this, and if I'm wrong, tell me, please. Okay, so he was born at the beginning of the century. He's from Lithuania originally, right? This is one of the it's one of the countries near Russia, right? And he born of a Jewish family, but a very assimilated Jewish family, right? They were very integrated, assimilated Jews, and Levinas himself was very connected to the world. He knew several languages. He's well versed. He knows German fluently, French fluently, as he is still living in Lithuania. He is well versed in Russian literature. He knows Russian, right? In fact, he alludes to Dostoevsky, some of these Russian writers in his writing. So he is already very, very well educated, speaks several languages, but is growing up in Lithuania. After a few years, his family moves to the Ukraine, but then they go back, mostly because of the anti-Semitic atmosphere. It was getting worse in Lithuania. They go to the Ukraine, it gets even worse. They go back, right? It's well known, right, that the USSR at the time was very anti-Semitic, right? You had a lot of problems as a Jew if you were living in that context. So when Levinas is around 17 years old, he's sick and tired of that atmosphere. He moves to France. Right, France, of course, has all of the flaws of humanity, but they at least have an ideal of secularism, right? So in France, the idea is that, you know, everyone is equal. We don't talk about religion. No one bashes anybody on the head about their religion, right? This gives kind of an atmosphere, at least a pseudo atmosphere of peace, right? Or pseudo peace. But at least it's tenable, right? So he moves to France because of this kind of secular atmosphere. You know, he knows he's not going to be bashed because he's Jewish, right? In general, the French tend to want to ignore religion and differences. So he moves there in 1923 and he begins to study philosophy. He goes 1 year in Germany to study under some of the main masters there, whom maybe you know. One of them is Husserl, the other one is Heidegger. So he knows these guys in person. These are some very famous German philosophers. So he studies with them in person. He's familiar with them. And in fact, he translates some of their works and brings some of their works back to France. He goes back, finishes his PhD, becomes the director of a Jewish high school. And, you know, his life is kind of set, seems to be going well, except in 1939, the war breaks out, right? World War II. And of course, he's of age. He's drafted into the army as an officer. And shortly after, with his luck, he's captured by the Nazis, right? So he's captured and put in a prisoner of war camp. The only reason he was not right away, you know, shipped off to a concentration camp as a Jew is that he wore the French uniform, right? Army uniform. And there was international law which protects prisoners of war, right? Doesn't protect Jews, but protects prisoners of war. So the uniform protects him. He's sent in a prisoner of war camp, and that's what saves his life in a way, right? The rest of his family in Lithuania and the Ukraine all die, right, at the hands of the Nazis, who overtake, right, almost all of Europe. In France, he had a wife and a daughter, and thankfully, while he is a prisoner, a very good friend of him hides his wife and daughter in a Catholic convent, right? So they are able to survive also the war due to this friend who took care of them. So anyways, during this time, right, in the war camp, which I believe he's staying, I have to check, but I think he stayed there several years. This is where he really begins to mature his philosophy. And this is where he's going to also hone onto the main concept he will be talking about, which is the concept of the other, right? And I'm gonna tell you a story to illustrate his evolution, right? This is a story he tells in one of his essays. And it's a story about a dog. So all the dog lovers in the class, you're going to love this story. So true story, right? This is one of the stories of his time as a war prisoner. And so he remembers that when he was a prisoner, they would go out every day, and their task was to, leave the camp, go onto the roads, repair the railroads, do some work, right, all day, and then they would come back. And he noticed that as they would go to work, they would always go through some villages, right? And they started to notice that each time they would walk through the street, the people there would kind of like not want to look at them in the eyes. They would kind of, turn their heads, act like they were not there, ignore them. They were embarrassed, right? They were embarrassed to look at them in the eyes because of what was happening, right? This was in Germany, by the way, right? These are villages in Germany. People are vaguely aware of what is going on, right, with the genocide, and people are, unable to really, or at least most people, right, are unable to really come to terms with what is happening, and so they prefer to turn their eyes, avert their eyes, right? So this is what was happening day after day after day. And Levinas and his friends, right, the fellow prisoners, they start to, it's draining, it's tiring, always to be ignored and never to be acknowledged as a human being, to be kind of, people act like they don't exist. And so on one particular difficult day, they get back home, and the gate of the camp is not yet closed. And in comes a stray dog, right? And the dog, is, how dogs are when they see people. The dog is overjoyed. He starts barking and jumping all around them. He's so happy. And so, he's just fellowshipping with the prisoners. And at that moment, Levinas realizes something very, very poignant, very shocking, that the dog is the only creature that still recognizes their humanity, right? The dog is the only one that still sees them as a human being in the whole country of Germany at the time. And so he gives the dog a nickname. He calls him the last Kantian in Germany. If you know Kant, right, Immanuel Kant was a famous philosopher in Germany who was known for his, philosophy of respect, of humanity, right? This was a philosopher who spoke about the need to respect everyone's dignity and humanity, and he wrote on and on about this in the 18th century. And so Levinas gives the dog the nickname of the last Kantian, the only Kantian left, able to recognize the dignity of who I am, able to respect my humanity, right? So after this experience, Levinas shifts philosophically, and he's going to dedicate all of his philosophy. You will never read something by Levinas without seeing this issue being addressed, which is the problem of the other, right? And this is so important for Levinas because, according to him, the reason that Europe was overtaken by the Nazis and that nobody moved a finger when the Jews were being herded off to the concentration camp is that, for Levinas, Europeans simply don't have a sense of the other. They know how to be good to each other, right? They learn this in school, to be neighborly. They learn to be, good to their families. They learn to be good to the fellow citizens. But the other is never, right? The other has no rights. If you're not part of the community, I don't owe you anything, right? This is the mindset of the Europeans. It's also our mindset, by the way, as Americans, right? We believe that we only owe help and assistance to our own. If you're coming from the outside and you're coming from some other, country, why should we help you? Right? We don't have, we're not, right? Why should we? So we have this mindset as Europeans, as Westerners, as Americans, that the only responsibilities we have are for the people of our own community, our own nation. And if you're from over there somewhere, why should we help you? This is your problem. Right? So Levinas is realizing that this is something, this is like we're missing something in our head, right? We're eager to help the ones that are close to us, but when it's another human being who's coming from another country, we don't feel responsible. And this is why you have something like the Holocaust that took place. Because once the Nazis had taken care to make sure that Jew was the other, to make sure that they stripped the Jew of their German citizenship, any type of, connection to the German people, then the Germans were like, why should we care for this guy, for these people? They're not us, right? So this is the problem. So Levinas is now saying we should not be just responsible for our neighbors and our own people. We should be responsible for any human being that crosses our path, right? And by the way, this is the kind of philosophy, Levinas and others, that gave rise to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? Let me explain that a little bit. Right, before that, you had the rights of the citizen, right? Each country had citizens who had rights, but if you were not from that country, you had no rights. Nobody was responsible for what was happening to you. You were a non-entity, you didn't exist. This is really what happened during the World War II. People who had no citizenship were left with no rights and therefore were allowed to be killed and destroyed. And so the gypsies, they went. The Jews, once they had been stripped of their German citizenship, they went, right? And so we realized, well, there's something deeply flawed with just citizens having rights. And so we created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which meant that every human being, by virtue of being a human being, no matter what country they come from, if they show up on your doorstep, they have rights. This is why, right, we have this law on asylum, right? The right of asylum that we have at the border, right? I can't write asylum. Right? This is why anyone can come to our border, right? And if they are persecuted and need humanitarian help, we have the duty to take care of them. This is a universal declaration of human rights. So this is the broadening that Levinas is saying that Europeans at the time need to do. We can't just be responsible for each other. We have to also feel responsible for any human being, no matter where they come from. If they show up on your doorstep, you owe that they have rights, right? And so that's really what he's going to be doing in his writing, is explore or develop or emphasize the need to also take care of the other and not just of our own, right? We need to extend ourselves beyond just our responsibilities to our own, to also feel responsible for the other. Okay, everybody understands what I'm saying? Following me? Put your hand in the screen. Any questions so far? Should I repeat something? Did I go too fast? Okay. All right, so this is a little bit what I've been talking about, is somewhat far away from our topic, which is suffering and and God, right? But we'll find ourselves back there again, since of course we're talking about the suffering of the other. And for Levinas, we're going to see a connection between the spiritual journey, between believing in God and being able to connect to someone in need. He's going to connect the two, right? He's going to say our spiritual journey, the depth of our relationship with God, is intimately connected to how we relate to human beings. In other words, if we can't relate to human beings properly, we can't relate to God properly, right? So they're connected. This idea of taking care of the other is one of the ways that we can still connect to God, according to Levinas. So they're connected. We'll see more on that in a second. Okay, main thing you need to write, right, is that for Levinas, we need to not think only of the people close to us, our fellow citizens. We also have a duty for the others who don't belong to our clan or to our nation, right? The non-citizen also has rights. They also matter. We also have a duty towards them. And this is a new concept at the time. And for some of us also, right? That we not only are responsible for our family or the people in our own country, but we also have a duty to help any other human being who crosses our path, right? This is what it means to be a human being, right? Yes, we're Americans or we're French or Europeans, and we have special duties to our fellow Americans, fellow Europeans, but as human beings, we have a duty to every other human being also, right? That's the idea. Okay, let's go into the text enigma and phenomenon. And I'm going to, of course, talk about what it means enigma, what it means phenomenon, right? Because that would help to know that will help us understand where the text is going. So two things I'm going to talk about in this text in detail. First of all, I'm going to talk about the problem of the hidden God. Number two, I'm going to talk about ethics as a path to God. Okay, if you understand these 2 points, you will understand everything the text is saying. So I'm already summarizing the text because it's so difficult, so that you can then navigate better. Okay, so starting with the problem of the hidden God, it's what I mentioned earlier, right? We are in the time of what some philosophers have called the eclipse of God, right? God is not there. We don't see him act or intervene. There seems to be a kind of complete silence, a deafening silence when it comes to God. And this is how many people experience the Holocaust, right? As the eclipse of God, or even Nietzsche would triumphantly say, right, the death of God. Right? We are in a time where God is not acting like God, right? The God we used to know, who thunders from his throne and intervenes and is gone, right? So we are in a way at a moment of death of a certain God, yes. And so in a way, Nietzsche is right when he says God is dead. Clearly, right? The God as we understood him, as someone who is powerful and all-loving, this God is dead after the Holocaust. If you still believe in this God, you are old-fashioned. I would say Levinas, right? So let's be very clear, right? The notion or the concept of a God who is, I'm writing it down, who is all-loving and all-powerful is truly dead. Now, it doesn't mean God is dead, right? But certainly the concept, the idea, the representation of God as, this powerful being thundering from the heavens, this doesn't exist. We didn't finished. We don't have this, right? And so we have to move towards a new understanding of God if we're going to understand what happened, right? So there's clearly God has hidden his face. We do not see clearly anymore who God is. And so one of the main responses to this eclipse of God is doubt, right? People emerge from the Holocaust with questions, right? Very, very serious questions as to whether God exists, whether religion is fake, whether we've all been lied to collectively. Anger, right? Anger and doubt are the two reactions and responses that people feel after the Holocaust, right? Even people like Elie Wiesel, who I might have mentioned before, right? Who is a Holocaust survivor, went into the camps, a young man, young boy, very religious, very pious, came out of the camps with questions, anger, frustration, and you see this in his writings, right? In fact, he has a whole book where he puts God on trial for what he did in the Holocaust. So So this is the climate, right? It's a climate of anger, frustration, doubt, questions. People have unanswered questions. And what Levinas is going to do, and this is quite brilliant, and we're going to see this in the text, is he's going to say, well, these questions are also a way to connect to God, right? And this should remind you of someone else who said something similar, right? When you have questions, when you're doubting, when you're struggling with your faith, actually, this is a way to connect to God. Can anyone tell me who said this in all the people that we studied? Very good, Alim, Maimonides. Excellent, right? Maimonides said the same thing. He said, it is better to question than to believe blindly. If you recall the hierarchy he draws, right? Maimonides, first there's the pagans over there who know nothing, right? Then you have the believers, pagan believers. Then you have, I think you have, I forget which one is first, but you have the pagan philosophers. Then you have the believers, right? Jewish, right? And then above, you have those who know how to question and therefore find proper reflect, right? Are able to reflect on their faith. So Maimonides said something very similar, that if you're able to question, and the fact that you're questioning, this is the highest path to God, right? So Levinas is going to go in that direction. He's going to say, everybody's doubting, everybody's angry, everybody's questioning, right? This can also be a path to God. There's another guy we did that followed the same route, found God through anger. Who was it? That one's easy. Who was the one person we read that found God through his anger? Yes, very good, right? Aline. Job, same thing, right? By the way, you notice this is the same tradition, right? Job, Maimonides, Levinas is a Jewish tradition, right? So you have there again this constant, this leitmotif of it's okay to be angry, it's okay to have questions. These two are path to God, right? So Levinas is going to do something quite masterful. He's going to say, well, see, this is also, in fact, for Levinas, this is the only path left to God. If you sink back into believing, like in a Walt Disney version of God or Hollywood happy ending version of God, you are deluding yourself completely. He would agree with Nietzsche, right? And so for Levinas today, after the Holocaust, the only legitimate path to God is one which is angry, questioning, frustrated, agnostic, right? Refusing to fall into the easy comfort of a nice God who helps us, right? He says these are the people who are not afraid to question and who are not afraid to reject the comforts of religion, right? The delusional comforts of religion. You should be hearing Nietzsche, right? These people who are able to question and stand up to what happened and disagree and be angry, this is the path. This is the only true path left, according to Levinas, right? So we're going to see more of that. Okay. However, for Levinas, there is ultimately one single, so this certainly can lead you to God, the intellectual questioning and so forth. But for Levinas, ultimately the real path to God, where you really have an encounter, right, is the path of ethics. So this brings me to the second point, right? Ethics as a path to God. And we're going to see that for Levinas, and we're going to see how he makes the argument. But for him, yes, God cannot be found in the heavens anymore. We don't have this God sitting on the throne, looking over the earth and figuring things out for us. But he says God may still be found in the universe, but he will be found in unexpected places. And we're going to see that for Levinas, the only place left where we can find God is among the oppressed and the wretched of the world. This is where God is hiding, right? It's as though God, after the Holocaust, went into hiding, right? Left his throne, right? As his people were being slaughtered, it's as though God came down from his throne and went into hiding among the wretched and the oppressed of the earth. And we'll see how Levinas, of course, makes this argument, right? Because it sounds nice, but is it true? Right? We're going to see. And so the only way left to connect to God after the Holocaust is to reach out to the wretched and the oppressed of the world. And as we are encountering these people, as we are lifting them up out of the dust, we are lifting God up out of his hiding place, right? So we're going to see that for Levinas, don't look up if you want to find God, look down, right? This is where God is after the Holocaust. He has fled. into the ghettos, into the shanty towns, into the places where he is the most needed. That's where he is, right? And to find him, we have to go there, right? So we're going to see how that works. But clearly we are dealing with a very different vision of God, right? And we're going to talk more about that. Okay, any questions so far that I need to clarify? All right. Okay, so last point. Oh, by the way, enigma and phenomenon. Let's define these really quick. Actually, no, I'll do it when we do the text. Yeah, I'll do it when we get into the text. So I'll let it in suspense for now. All right, last point I want to make is how to read Levinas. So you can find your way. Like I did that for Marcel also, so you can be able to navigate better. So let me tell you my experience with Levinas. So I first encountered Levinas in college when I was like your age. I was doing my thesis, my senior thesis. I came to my advisor. I said, okay, I want to do something on, existentialism and Jewish philosophy. And he said, oh, really? Okay, well, why don't you read Levinas? I said, okay. I went to the library. I got his big book called Totality and Infinity. It was Thanksgiving break, kind of like now. I went and spent the break reading that book, like 300 pages of, Levinas. And then I came back and he said, so what did you think? I said, oh my God, I loved it. I said, I didn't understand anything, but I loved it. And so this is probably going to be your experience. You will love it because of the style. There's a rhythm in Levinas. It's like an explosion of ideas and feelings and visions, right? So he writes in a very explosive way. He kind of captures you and kind of kidnaps you in this kind of crazy flow, right? So it's an incredible experience as far aesthetically speaking. It's an incredible experience because you feel kind of drawn into this magma of ideas and thoughts, and it sounds very poetic and profound, and there's these moments where you sense you're about to penetrate the secret of the universe, right? It's very, very mysterious and secretive, right? So you sense you're always on the edge of something with Levinas, kind of like with Marcel, right? Except that you won't understand a word. I'm serious. Levinas, to be honest, I did not, the first time I read him, I understood nothing, but there were some beautiful sentences that I felt were very deep and meaningful, and that there was a great secret hiding there somewhere. So there is kind of an element in Levinas of the esoteric, right? If you like esoteric stuff, like kind of stuff that is hidden and everything is secret and you have to be initiated, this is the feeling you will get with Levinas. And his style is very engaging, it's very rhythmic, it's very poetic, right? So eventually, of course, right, when I studied Levinas in depth, I started to see what he was saying, right? But for a long time, I was like, wow, what is this? This feels amazing, but I don't know what he's trying to say exactly. So there's a reason why he writes like this, and I want to talk about that briefly, so you don't think he's just one of those French elitist philosophical minds. What Levinas is trying to do by writing in this way, I believe, is not only talk to us about the other, but put us in direct contact with otherness. In other words, the Levinas text is your other. So when you start to read, you will be faced with another, with someone you cannot grasp and understand and control and master, and which is confronting you and challenging you. And this is what it means to be in contact with another you don't understand. When you're dealing with someone who is other, you cannot master them, you cannot control them, they challenge you, they make you uncomfortable. So what Levinas is doing and writing in the way he's writing is putting you in the presence of otherness. And so before you even understand what he's saying, you're already there. You're already having this encounter with otherness. You're already experiencing what he's trying to talk about, right? This very powerful encounter with otherness, which makes us uncomfortable, but which also challenges us and allows us to grow beyond our comfort zone, right? This is what the other does. even though they make us uncomfortable and we feel, you know, like we wish they weren't there. They are also helping us expand our horizons and grow. So this is what the text of Levinas should do to you. You should allow it to do that, right? Allow the text to make you uncomfortable, to challenge you, to bring you out of your comfort zone. Let it happen, right? Don't resist it. Don't try to figure it out. Don't get angry at it, right? These are two bad reactions. The first one, you want to master it. The second one, you give up, right? No, just be in the presence of this, experience what it feels like to be out of control, to not master something, to be brought out of your comfort zone, to feel uncomfortable. Allow yourself to experience this, because this is already learning how to be with another. You are already experiencing what it's like to be in the presence of another. You're already learning how to interact with another. So when you read Levinas, just go with the flow, right? You don't understand? Allow yourself to experience that. Don't resist it. Don't fight it. Allow yourself to feel overwhelmed, to feel like this is way beyond your capacity, to feel uncomfortable, because this is already what Levinas wants you to learn. How do we learn to be uncomfortable and yet to stay in the relationship, right? That's the idea. So when you do your reading assignment, you can do your best, write what you can. If you have a phrase that you like, you can try to explain it, or you can just vent your frustration. That's fine. But in essence, I want you to experience being clueless in front of a text. I want you to experience not understanding, not mastering, and feeling uncomfortable. This is a good experience to have. Okay, I have said everything I wanted to say. Any last questions? Okay.
Professor, could I speak to you after class?
Yes, definitely.
After, okay. Thank you.
And also, where were you? Suresh, are you still there, Suresh? Where are you, Suresh? Ah, there, also Suresh. Yeah, the rest of you, your exam is due by Saturday. So please make sure that all of you hand in the exam by Saturday. I know I wasn't there for like one lecture, I think, on Marcel. So make sure before you take the test that you listen to that lecture. It's a lecture from the summer or from the spring, but it's the same material. And I've put it on our playlist. So you should be able to access it easily and catch up what I missed. Okay, let me stop there.